Hey folks, this is Dave, and you are in Bleeding Edge. Welcome. Thank you for joining me for my second album review. 2 album reviews in, and we're already going to digress from progressive rock as I take a look at the latest effort from Tremonti. It's called The End Will Show Us How, and it's coming right up. All right, as I said, yes, we're already going to digress a little bit from progressive rock as I dig into Tremonti's latest album. Couple reasons for that. Mostly one, because this is a band that I've maybe wanted to check out for quite some time and really have never given clear attention to. They just have been on my radar, but not in my ears, as you might say. And I wanted to give it a listen. I had the opportunity, so timing plus interest came together. I'll be honest, I'll confess, I've really only got a passing familiarity with them as a band over the years. Of course, we know Mark Tremonti from his work with Creed and Alter Bridge, as well as some of his solo work. And I can't say I was ever really a fan of Creed all that much. I didn't hate them, as seems to be the trendy thing to do or to say in this day and age. They didn't do a lot for me. That's all. I have been a rather big fan of Alter Bridge. Now, in particular, Blackbird was my favorite album of theirs, and some of their recent stuff maybe hasn't quite been to that level, and I've lost track of them a little bit, but I've always been a fan, and I'm particularly a fan of Miles Kennedy and his vocals. So there is some interest there, and as I mentioned, Tremonti kind of was on my radar, but just not something I got around to playing. Keep in mind, as I review this album, I can't legitimately compare this effort to their previous albums, because I don't know the previous albums. I have a few songs, a handful maybe, that I've heard, so I won't be trying to do anything like rank it among their work. I'm just going to take it as it is in a microcosm. And of course, between his work with Creed and Alter Bridge and his solo work, this is the 19th album featuring Mark Tremonti in one form or another. 6th album for his band Tremonti, which I've always been told is his project to dig a little bit deeper into heavy metal. I've heard thrash metal thrown out there, not hearing that, but okay, we'll go with that. I'm just going to take people at their word for it. So on this album, we of course have Mark himself on lead guitar, lead vocals, and arrangements and such. Eric Friedman providing rhythm guitar and backing vocals, as well as string arrangements and some keyboard programming. Ryan Bennett is on drums, and Tanner Keegan is on bass and backing vocals. This effort was produced by Michael Elvis Basket, or Basket, I'm not sure how he pronounces that. Name a heavy band, whether in metal or just hard rock, he's probably worked with them. The dude gets around, and it's certainly not their first time working with him. So, that's kind of a summary in brief. The album itself alternates between themes of pessimism about society or whatever, and persevering through hard times. So it's kind of back and forth, mood-wise, tonally, I guess. The shared roots with Creed and Alter Bridge are quite apparent. How much of that is a positive or negative, I guess, is going to depend on you, the listener. So for some, maybe they won't like that. For others, maybe they are perfectly thrilled with that idea. But it's the tones, the sound, the style are all there. It's clearly a project involving Mark Tremonti. His fingerprints are all over it. Like I said, for me, never been a big fan of Creed. Definitely a fan of Alter Bridge. And I certainly dug Mark's digressions into Sinatra-era standards. He does a remarkable Frank Sinatra impersonation. I don't think that's what he intends to do. But between singing style and vocal tone, man, it's pretty amazing. And, I enjoyed his Christmas album, and I was lucky enough to get to talk to him last year before that album was released. So he's a good dude. He's a nice guy. And, what can I say? That is my experience with them. So, again, quick reminder, I grade albums on a 4-point rating scale. Everything from 1 to 5 is the number. And I have 4 categories: intellectual, innovation, technicality, emotional, and, hey, depending what's going on, I might add an enjoyment modifier, as I like to call it. More details on that if you want to check out my previous review, the first one I did of Devin Townsend's Power Nerd. So digging into this. Starting with intellectual, as we always do. As I noted, there are a lot of references in this album to pessimism, whether it be societal or maybe related to governmental and political. Also, that's counterbalanced with a lot of songs that seem to be about resilience and perseverance and powering through difficult times. Toss in a dash of carpe diem philosophy as well, and I think you got the overall tone. Though I don't know that there was any expressed intent that this would be a conceptual album in terms of those themes. I think that's just the way it came out. I've not read or heard anything from Mark himself as to what his inspirations were for this album, other than perhaps observing the world at large and just wanting to say a few things about it. I think just for me, if he was going to say some things about him, I honestly kind of came away from this wishing he had elaborated a little more, gone in a little bit more depth. The lyrics overall for me were frustratingly vague at times, as I wasn't quite clear exactly what stand he was taking or exactly what thought process he had going on. I know I mentioned in my last review of Devon that there were times that the lyrics were a little bit vague, but that was infrequent. This one, almost every song, other than the fact that I knew he was talking about society ills or governmental ills or political ills or being resilient and being defiant at times and fighting through things. And again, I picked up on the Carpe Diem theme. That was about it. You could summarize, I think, the content in many ways in a sentence or a few words. And I think for me, it left me wanting more lyrically. I wanted him to go deeper. While the theme was clear, exactly what he was thinking was not, maybe what he was referring to was not, whether he took a stand. No stands taken here. So all the stands remained where they were. And so I don't know. At times it felt like slogans appropriate for inspirational posters that you'd find in the workplace almost, or, God forbid I invoke the hang in there kitty. It's you did a little more than that, but not much. And this is a hot take on my part that I was really mulling over. The idea that if you're going to go into the playground of really heavy rock bordering on metal, straddling the two, I think at some point in time you can't play your lyrics with the intent to avoid upsetting anybody or pissing anybody off or alienating anybody. I don't know that that was the intent. These may be written in a way that they can be universal so that anybody can feel free to apply them to themselves without the baggage of a certain political or societal viewpoint. That's cool. I get it. But at the same time, again, I kind of feel like in the genre of metal, there's almost an obligation to take risks, to take a chance that you may upset or offend a listener or two. I think their lyrics are usually meant to be challenging, whether intentionally provocative or simply challenging somebody to think about a different viewpoint or throwing out them what seemingly a contradictory stance on things, trying to get a point across. That just to me seems to be almost incumbent upon those in the genre. So, I don't know. Maybe I came across a little frustrated that he didn't seem to want to go too far one way or the other and risk upsetting or alienating anybody of the listeners. That's his prerogative. For me, I guess I just maybe wanted a little bit more. I wanted to be challenged a little bit more, or maybe get a little more insight into where he sits on these things rather than seemingly straddling the fence. Is what it is. For some people, that's great. And the lyrics are perfectly nice. I think they're well written, and they certainly lend themselves to somebody maybe wanting to sing along. They just perhaps don't challenge the listener to think too deeply. And I think I would like to have heard that. So for the intellectual component, I'm going to give it a 2. I'm sorry, but it's certainly not the worst thing I've ever heard. He's not singing about boobs and beer and motorcycles. No offense to those who like songs about boobs and beers and motorcycle, but it's not intellectual content. He certainly, I think there was an intent there. I just think he could have taken a little further to achieve a better result. Looking at the innovation component. Now that's tricky here because admittedly I'm not listening to an album that is progressive in its orientation or its style, so I think there is a certain area in which Tremonti is expected to play and to sound. And since I can't compare it to other Tremonti albums, I can't discuss in any depth at the moment how much they did or did not grow, whether they regressed or anything like that. So admittedly, I left myself a little bit out of depth there, but I'll ride along with it. So basically, it just feels like it firmly fits within the styles that are established within the Mark Tremonti ethos. He has, between Creed and Alter Bridge and all that, and his previous work with his band, as noted, this is like his 6th album with this band. It's exactly where you expect it to be. It's the sounds you expect to hear, and that's neither good nor bad. I guess that depends on how you feel about those other bands. Ultimately, they do throw in some interesting techniques and tones that I think probably may be uncommon in the musical palette of Tremonti, and those other bands, certainly I've not heard them. Just cool little things and variations at times that I enjoyed. Most commonly, interestingly enough, it was notable in the intros of a number of the songs where there was a bit of a departure from the heavy, crunchy riffs and at times something a little softer, a little more acoustic. Things that threw in some synths and stuff like that you wouldn't necessarily normally expect to hear, but nothing I would necessarily call revelatory or earth-shattering, but just some cool additional spices to the flavor palette that is that hard rock styling of Tremonti. Overall, though, I mean, they stay pretty firmly within the boundaries established by their previous work. Longtime fans, I think, will most likely enjoy that and be pleased with it. Those who enjoy that kind of music, I think, will probably find it enjoyable. I think they know their strengths, and I think they know their audience very well. And they played to both of those on this. And I think they stuck within the boundaries that they have established for themselves as artists. So neither an advancement nor a regression. I'd call this a 3 for this score. Looking at the technicality part of it. Now, as noted, we're not talking about a progressive rock band. So maybe the expectations could be a bit different. I don't know. That's up to you, the listener. For me, one, there's no doubt this is a talented band. It goes without saying that Tremonti is a guitarist of supreme talent. He is one of the greats out there playing right about now, and he shows that off very well on this album. He does a great job. He's able to exercise restraint when the song calls for it, when the moment calls for it. He will peel your face off with solos when the time comes. He throws in some crunchy riffs and some smoother riffs. He keeps it varied in terms of tone and technique and sound throughout the album. A couple of things I really did enjoy as far as that goes. The title track comes in with this nice little intro that really was, how should I describe it? This kind of cool picking mixed in with harmonics that was really nice. I liked that. It's the best way I can describe it, but the intro's there, and it does flow throughout the song, and it's a little bit like it's a bit syncopated. It's probably the best way I can do it. It throws you off ever so slightly with its rhythms and its progression, and to me, that was really cool. I enjoyed that. That was actually a standout for me, and actually, the title track is a standout track overall for me, to be perfectly honest, because if you throw in Mark's vocal performance on this album, that to me is his best right there. He stretches his things beyond his normal range. Like normally, Mark's a very serviceable hard rock vocalist. He does a good job. He's got smooth delivery. He doesn't get into harsh vocals or anything like that. They're very nice, clean vocals. He's got a great tone. He sings well. They just are probably what I would not call necessarily remarkable, and maybe there's some issue there with me in my head kind of comparing to what we get from Miles Kennedy on an Alter Bridge album. But in this case, the emotional peaks are really there. He stretches himself into his higher range in the chorus, and I think that's where he gets most emotive, and I enjoyed that a lot. That to me was a favorite part of the album. Meanwhile, like a song like The Bottom has these kind of cool chugging guitars in the intro that are very almost alternative rock in style. That I dug that. The vibe was really there and changed things up from an album that sits very squarely in the hard rock arena. And meanwhile, the final song, All the Wicked Things, has this cool droning kind of ominous synth that starts off the song and kind of flows throughout that, which I thought was a really nice touch. It's a shame the song's a bit of a downer to end the album on, giving the alternation? Alternating between pessimism and hopefulness. It's a shame to kind of end it when something feels a bit downer. And also, you know what, there's bits and pieces here and there where I'm hearing, I think, what I thought was a Meshuggah influence. So he does keep the songs varied. He does keep the listener, I think, interested and engaged by changing things up here and there without losing the overall style of the album. And I usually like my albums that way, you know, in the sense that I can hear that there's an overall style that is cohesive in the album, and yet the songs are varied enough that they don't all start to sound exactly the same. And he does a good job with that. They do a good job with that. I keep wanting to say he, like it's a solo artist or something, but he's not. Interesting note on that final song as well, All the Wicked Things. During that intro with the droning synth, I don't know if it's just me. Anybody else listening to this might hear it also, but I swear his Sinatra stylings in the vocals were coming through, and it was really the kind of perplexing juxtaposition at that particular moment as I hear this building into a hard rock song with almost what sounded like Frank Sinatra singing, which in and of itself gives me a very interesting idea of, wow, could we maybe do that somewhere? And somebody somewhere maybe mix Sinatra vocals with some metal or hard rock. Maybe I'm weird, but that's what I heard. Anyway, really very, very solid on the technical side. This is, again, a very solid, very talented band. They very clearly are very used to playing with one another, and the album is produced immaculately. You can hear everything nice and clearly. Nothing overwhelms. Nothing gets buried in the mix. Yes, it's not designed to appeal to the prog crowd, which I know my show centers on. But that's fine. It's not what it was meant to do. They are doing what Tremonti does. So overall, within the realm of what they do, I would score this one a 4. Very well done. Emotional, that component. Now, as you might have guessed so far into this review, this is one I really don't feel I connected with very well emotionally. Mostly when I'm listening to music, I will most commonly connect with the vocals. That's where I usually get the emotional component, but sometimes it depends on the instruments and the arrangements and the composition, but a lot of it comes in the vocals for me. And again, Mark is solid. He's a great singer. He just doesn't have that, I think, kind of tone. He didn't have that kind of approach to this album that, for me, connected on an emotional level. There's not a lot of highs. There's not a lot of super lows. His range is what it is, and it's pretty solid, as I noted on the title track. That's the part where it most connected for me, and I thought that he really did a great job with emoting in the chorus and stretching his range a bit. And I'd like to hear him do more of that. I really would, because he did a great job with that. It's just not a lot of that in the album. That's a standout rather than a common thing. Lyrics, again, I think that was lacking the kind of level of substance that I normally would want to see in my lyrics. I think the themes were nice, and I think he expressed some things fairly well. It just didn't go very deep, and not to the level that it would grasp me and give me some sort of emotional response to it, whether getting angry about the pessimistic things or feeling especially hopeful or whatever. Just didn't do it. There were some moments musically where it maybe did a bit. It's good, solid, heavy rock, but just not to the degree that I felt moved. I think it's about the best way I can say it. It's tough to express the emotional component in words, because the words are coming from the intellectual side of my brain. So it is what it is there. But, he didn't bring me down so much with the pessimistic stuff. He didn't elevate me with the hopeful stuff. They were there, and I understood them, but they connected with me more on an intellectual level than an emotional level. So similar to the intellectual side, unfortunately, I do have to score this a 2. So, in the end, we're going to have that score, and we're talking about something where there wasn't much one way or the other for me to apply an enjoyment modifier, as I like to call it there. There's nothing where I said this is more or less than the sum total of its parts. It is exactly the sum total of its parts. And the sum total of its parts give us a final score of 2.75 out of 5. So there we go, 2.75 for Tremonti. The end will show us how. Overall, I mean, honestly, and I feel like I'm being negative, and maybe legitimately I am. Call me out on that if you think so. I think it's honestly a very solid and listenable album. There's nothing where I walk away from this going, oh my God, this is trash, or oh my God, this is amazing. It's just kind of, in the lower side of the middle for me. It is, I think, ultimately exactly what one might expect from a Tremonti album. I think the fans will most likely enjoy it. I don't know how they'll compare it to the other albums because I've not heard the other albums. But there's certainly a good sense of melody and heavy metal type dramatics throughout this. The playing on it is stellar, especially Mark and his guitar and his solos and the things he throws in here and there that change things up a little bit. And the various styles that he melds into their overall sound. I think that stuff was really, really well done, and that was my favorite part of the album. If you want some heavy rock or some lighter metal, something that sort of straddles the line between those two, this is a good choice. I recommend it. For me, again, I might have wanted to see a little bit greater lyrical depth, a little bit more of an emotional connection, maybe stretching a little bit more outside of their boundaries, but that's maybe not what they're meant to do. And that's my expectation. And if they don't hit that expectation for me, that's my problem. That's not theirs. They did what Tremonti does, and I think they did it well. So again, I wouldn't expect them to be proggy. That wouldn't be true to themselves. And there you have it. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts? How do you compare it to their other albums? I'd like to hear from the Tremonti fans out there, or even Creed and Alter Bridge fans, people that like Mark Tremonti's work with or without this band. Am I off base? Do you think I missed the target on this? Do you agree with me? Do you think that I heard what's really on the album? Am I being overly picky? It's entirely possible. I am capable of that. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Please share them in the comments. Let me know what you think of this album yourself. Give me your thoughts on it. Also, if you could take a moment, subscribe to the channel. Keep up with my progressive rock album reviews and reactions when I get back to those. And some interviews. Pardon me. Got this far into it. And I'm not editing, so live with it. It's too much to edit. Actually, a couple interviews coming. I did not expect to really be doing those much anymore, and lo and behold, something jumped out there for me. So follow along, subscribe to the channel if you would. Meanwhile, that's all I have for you at this point in time. I leave you with the usual reminder, please never fear to deviate from the norm. And until next time, keep it proggy.